Hello, I'm Daniel Carwile from Carwile String Studio in Lexington, Kentucky. I would like to teach you a tune today. It's one of my favorite tunes. It's a hornpipe. It's called Cincinnati Hornpipe. And I plan to play it kind of a moderate tempo for you, and then we'll go back and slow it down, and I'll just teach you phrase by phrase so you can learn it by ear. But then also the video should capture my fingerings and my bowings, okay? And then at the end, once we have the tune presented, I'm going to get into some technique issues, some things to look for, not just on this tune, but any tune you play, okay? I've been teaching almost 30 years now, and I've taught kids as young as 3 and as old as 82. Beginners, intermediates, advanced, professionals, people who read music, people who play by ear. I've covered it all and seen and taught many. And so I've seen these common things, these trends that all students tend to share, challenges, shall we say, and we've all gone through it. I mean, even I did when I started playing 40 years ago. But I'll give you a couple of drills and exercises to think about. And as I said, we're going to use Cincinnati Hornpipe sort of as the vehicle. The reason I really like this tune, number one, it's in a nice key, a friendly key for us as fiddlers. The key of D major with F sharp and C sharp in the key signature. But not just that, the slurring pattern on this is not very complicated, so that simplifies things for us so we can focus on some other issues, particularly with this right hand. So that's what we're going to get into at the end, is the bow and the right hand. And one other thing about hornpipes that I think are wonderful for you to practice, and they're way more fun than practicing scales. Those scales are valuable, of course they are, but with the hornpipes, you're dealing with mostly arpeggios. And then in any given key, we always encounter the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, sometimes even the 2 chord. But we have these arpeggiations, and the arpeggiation's good for us from a technique point of view because it helps us learn how to cross strings smoothly, okay? And that's very important. I know in the classical world, in that tradition, the emphasis is really on string crossing, and honestly, and lots of times, fingerings and bowing choices in the classical world, you try to avoid the string crossing if at all possible. Whereas as a fiddler, we're not that worried about it. I mean, so we have to master that technique. So anyway, this is a great one for that. Cincinnati Hornpipe in the key of D major. 1, 2. Normal tempo, I would say no faster than 108, 110, 112 in cut time, and probably no slower than 92, I would say, ideally. That would be a good metronome range for you. Okay, now let's go slowly. 1 and 2 and... now phrase by phrase. So you want to make sure you get that. Some of you guys probably don't read music, and that's fine. I would highly recommend you write out the fingerings, or sometimes in the bluegrass tradition we call that tablature. So like if you were one of those folks, I would think of that as open, open, or maybe 0, 0, 0, and then 2, 0, 0, 0, 2, 0. And you can even put the string that you're on, like the D string versus the A string. I think that could work for you, be helpful. Some of you won't need to do that. Some of you do read music, and if you do read music, you could transcribe this and write it out on staff paper. If you're one of those folks, I would think of this as cut time, okay? Cut time in D major, and I'm playing mostly eighth notes. So that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 or you could think of it as 4/4. So that's how you would do that, okay? And I would do like 4 measures on a line if I were you, okay? Back to that opening phrase again. Okay, then the next phrase. Okay, and then the next phrase, which is just like the first phrase. And then the last phrase. So if you think of it, it's like phrase 1, phrase 2, phrase 3, phrase 4. But honestly, phrase 1 and phrase 3 are exactly the same. Okay, so some people think of that as A, B, A, C, and that's okay. Or some people think of it as like the A and then the first ending, and then A and then the second ending. Whatever works for you. When somebody's listening to you play this, they won't know how you've conceptualized it, okay? So whatever works best for you as you try to learn this melody and put it in your memory bank, that's what I would go with. And what works best for me might not work for you. So try different things. And most of you know what works best anyway at this point. So I just stick with that. Now that's the A section, total of 8 measures, and then we repeat that. And then we go to the B section. Let me see. With pickup notes, it would be. Then the next phrase. And then the third phrase. And then the final phrase. Now, all of those are different. So think of that as phrase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? And then that repeats. So it's AABB, a popular form, most common fiddle tune form. In the classical tradition, we call that a binary form or a 2-part form. And all these were dance tunes originally. So the form was important for the dancers to keep their dance working properly. And several of you have probably played for dances before, and you know this, AABB, and you just do that over and over and over, AABB, AABB. And then sometimes we'll play a medley, we'll change tunes, we go straight into the next tune, and you play AABB again over and over and over 5 or 6 times. And then sometimes if the dance has really got a lot of energy, we go into a third tune. So anyway, 2-part tune, binary. Now let's get into some of that technique stuff I was talking about early on. One thing is your bow. I see this a lot, and I've seen it a lot in my career, is how tight we should tighten the bow. Lots of times people that come to the fiddle world from the classical tradition, they're used to using a really tight bow. There's nothing wrong with that. We need that in the classical tradition, but in the fiddle world, it's not necessary. It's overkill. It's redundancy. It's not, and our bow gets a little what I call on the jumpy side. And so we really don't want that. We want the bow to be more what I call laying into the string, okay? Or what's the word I'm looking for here? Just the weight of the bow needs to just kind of squat or sink into the string. To me, that's really the essence of our tone, okay? So with that in mind, I would say tighten your bow at least 1/8 of an inch here in the middle, and probably no more than 1/4 inch. Plus, modern bows are very, very good. Even a good carbon fiber bow these days, you don't have to spend a fortune, and they have really nice camber, and they're firm. So because the sticks are firmer than they were when I started playing 40 years ago, the bows, a lot of times cheaper priced bows, were really soft here in the middle, and you had to tighten your bow really, really tight as a compensation. Like my great grandfather was an old time fiddler, and I've seen photos of him, and they were, man, the old time cats 100 years ago, they would have that much space between the hair and the bow, but they had to. They were using really cheap sticks. They couldn't afford anything else back then. So in order to get it to play, they had to tighten their bow, and then they would choke up on their bow like this. And then, so that whole short bow old time tradition, it was a result, it was necessity is really what it was. But over time, the last 100 years, the bows have evolved. I think they're better now than they've ever been, and they're more affordable now than they've ever been. And so because the bows have what I call a good backbone to them, they're firm now, you don't have to play as tight as you had to, let's say 40 years ago when I started. So 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, right in that range, okay? Another thing I see that I want you to be aware of as you practice this, try not to roll your bow too far forward. I know in the classical tradition that's important, and of course it is, for different colors and timbres, effects that we need, depending on what position we're in or what era of the classical music period we're playing from. But in the fiddle world, not so much. I think flatter hair is the way to go, okay? It's what we call the ribbon of horsehair, but I like to think of your bow as like a brush, okay? Like if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you go to the painting section, there are all these brushes. I tell students this all of the time. You can buy a 1/2 inch brush, a 1 inch brush, a 2 inch, a 3 inch, or even a 4 inch, and then, of course, the rollers that we paint our walls with. So to me, the bow is like that. So the more, or the flatter the hair, or the ribbon we call it, the wider the bow, or the wider the brush, if you want to use that metaphor. And then the more I roll over, the thinner the ribbon is, or the more narrow the brush would be. And so I've always thought of it that way my entire life. So like flat hair is what I call the 4 inch brush. When we roll over maybe 10 or 20 degrees, it's the 3 inch brush. When we roll over 30 to 40 degrees, you know, it's the 2 inch brush, etc. So think of it that way. When you play waltzes or ballads, something slower, I think it's important to roll to make your tone a little sweeter, a little smoother. But on a hornpipe or a jig or a bluegrass breakdown, you want that hair to be flatter. And by flatter, you don't have to work as hard to produce your tone. So that's very important. Okay, another point I want to mention today in this video is our sounding point, where the hair touches the string. Okay. Generally, I tell students right in the middle between the bridge and the fingerboard, but honestly, I think we should find that mid spot right here and then go forward maybe 1/4 of an inch. On my violin, that's right there at the front edge of the F-holes. To me, that's what I call the sweet spot, okay? So if this is right in the middle, and then go forward 1/4 inch. I think for fiddlers and for fiddle tunes, that's where we want to be. If you go too far down here, your string crossings are going to sound a little sloppy, messy, soupy, dirty. If you're up here, they're going to sound a little too scratchy, and your articulation will be too pronounced. We don't want that. We want to be more subtle than that. Okay, so, but if you're one of these people that are in the middle, you're probably in pretty good shape. But I would encourage you to move that down ever so slightly, and practice that in front of a mirror at the house. Okay, so I'm going to act like you're the mirror. You'll want to turn like this and watch that some to make sure that that sounding point's not moving. Also, I would highly, which is the next element I want to point out today, when you're playing, make sure your right elbow is nice and relaxed. I tell students your elbow's like a hinge, like a door hinge. You don't rip the door off of the door facing to open the door, but I swear some people play like that. You want to soften and relax that elbow, okay? So we hinge at the elbow. Keep this forearm nice and relaxed. That's important. I call it soft forearm. I like to imagine that muscle there is like a cotton ball. Okay, it's soft. Keep that nice and soft, and then you'll notice when I play, my wrist wrist is relaxed, but the big thing you probably saw earlier when I played is my right fingers. Man, they're really, really soft. I've always said I think my right hand fingers do most of the heavy lifting. It's important that you keep those fingers nice and soft. So if I turn back this way for the camera, you can see that. And I think a lot of people don't get that. I mean, I think a lot of people get the hinging at the elbow. A lot of people get the hinging or relaxed wrist, okay? But a lot of people, I would say 3 out of 5 people don't get the fingers. So be aware of that. Again, pretending you're the mirror. Just watch that. Get used to that. Ask yourself, are my fingers moving? I spent hours as a little kid years ago watching my fingers in the mirror, just like now. When I was a little boy, I thought of these as little finger push-ups. So I think that's important. And the good thing about this Cincinnati hornpipe is you practice going from a low string to a high string, that string crossing. You also get to go from a high to a low string. So I like to call those clockwise circles and counterclockwise circles, or more elliptical shaped, like a jelly bean, if you will. So look for that. Look at that joint right there as you watch me do that. So that's like this elliptical clockwise deal. And then this string crossing is just the opposite. And then that's just the flat bow stroke. So again, another reason I like this tune, another reason I chose to teach you this tune today, is you get to work on the flat bow stroke and then what I call the rounded string crossing bow stroke. And those are all great exercises that you can practice in front of the mirror, and you can use this tune to practice it every day, and you'll never get tired of it. It's such a great melody. It has wonderful contrast. So please be aware of that, okay? And then one last thing as you play visually, I'm going to act like the camera here is the mirror. Make sure you're right in the middle of the bow, okay? And make sure you're not wavering with your bow like this. Keep that bow parallel to the bridge and then also perpendicular to the strings. That's really important. I see this as a teacher. A lot of people do this. You know, they pull off line, and then as they get better and they get from the what I call the beginner state into the intermediate state, they learn how to control that, and all you really do is shorten your bow stroke. So when you shorten your bow stroke, you don't see as much waver. And that's good. I'm not knocking that. But then the next layer is to then soften and relax, as I said earlier, the elbow, the forearm, the wrist, the fingers. Then you get total control. And I've always thought of these fingers as like shock absorbers on our cars. When we cross the railroad tracks, it's what keeps it from being a bumpy experience. Crossing strings can be a bumpy experience, but it doesn't have to be. So I really think the key is the fingers, okay? So I probably give you way more than you wanted to, but I'm famous for this. I'm a very analytical person and love details, and I've thought about this, as you can tell, a lot over the years. I tell you what, let me play this one more time for you, and then I think we can call that a wrap. Cincinnati Hornpipe. 1, 2. That'll do it. Yeah, and I'd like to thank the Violin Shop for asking me to do this. What a great place, a great resource for all of us. So please check out their website and see what other videos they may have available for you. Take care.